Before you watch this story, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because what you're about to discover will completely change how you think about warfare. Drop a comment below telling me which historical sniper you think was the deadliest. I read every single one. Now, imagine you're a Soviet soldier in 1939, standing guard in a frozen Finnish forest. Your breath creates clouds of steam in the minus 35 degrees Celsius air. Everything is silent. Everything is white. Then, without warning, the man next to you drops dead. No gunshot, no muzzle flash, nothing. Just death arriving from nowhere. This isn't a movie. This happened to thousands of Soviet soldiers who faced an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't hear, and couldn't defeat. The Finns called them sissi. The Soviets called them belaya smert, the White Death. And by the end of the Winter War, the mere rumor of a Finnish sniper in the area was enough to paralyze entire Soviet battalions. This is their story, and it's more terrifying than any horror movie you've ever watched. December 2nd, 1939, Kola Sector, Eastern Finland. Soviet Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov stood in his command trench, studying the snow-covered forest 300 meters ahead through his binoculars. His battalion had been ordered to advance through this sector for the past 3 days. They had gained exactly 0 meters. Not because of artillery, not because of machine gun nests, because of something Volkov could not see, could not locate, and could not kill. In the last 48 hours, he had lost 17 men, each one shot through the head or chest, each one killed by a single bullet, each one dead before hitting the ground. The shots came from different directions at different times, sometimes 2 hours apart, sometimes within minutes of each other. His men were terrified to move, terrified to stand, terrified to breathe too loudly in case it gave away their position. Volkov had fought in Poland. He had led men through urban warfare in villages where every building held enemy soldiers. But this was different. In Poland, you could see your enemy. You could shoot back. You could advance or retreat with tactical logic. Here, in this frozen nightmare, there were no rules. There was only white silence and sudden death. What Volkov did not know was that the man killing his soldiers was not a professional military sniper. He was a farmer named Simo Haiha, 34 years old, standing 5 feet 3 inches tall, who had learned to shoot moose in these same forests since childhood. Haiha was lying in a snow burrow 400 meters from the Soviet position, so perfectly camouflaged that even if you stood 10 meters away, you would see nothing but undisturbed snow. He used a Finnish M/28-30 rifle, with iron sights, no scope. Scopes could create glare that gave away positions. Scopes could fog up in extreme cold. Scopes were for soldiers who needed technology to compensate for lack of skill. Haiha needed none of these things. He had been shooting targets at 400 meters since he was 17 years old. Today's work was not warfare to him. It was simply the same thing he had been doing his entire life, except the targets moved and wore Soviet uniforms. By January 1940, reports were flooding into Soviet headquarters in Moscow that demanded explanation. A single Finnish defensive line with fewer than 15,000 soldiers was holding back 120,000 Soviet troops. The casualty ratio was catastrophic. For every Finn killed, 23 Soviet soldiers died. Army Group Commander Kirill Meretskov read these numbers 3 times before believing them. The problem was not Finnish tanks. They had almost none. The problem was not Finnish aircraft. The Soviets controlled the skies. The problem was Finnish snipers, who operated with kill ratios that seemed physically impossible. Soviet intelligence had identified approximately 32 Finnish marksmen credited with over 300 kills each. The top 5 snipers had each killed more than 500 Soviet soldiers. Meretskov ordered a specialized counter-sniper unit deployed to the Kala sector in mid-January. The unit consisted of 40 trained Soviet marksmen equipped with Mosin-Nagant rifles with PU scopes, white camouflage suits, and orders to eliminate the Finnish shooters at any cost. Their commander, Captain Yuri Stepanov, had trained for this mission for 2 months in Siberia, learning to operate in extreme cold and to track enemies through snow. Stepanov's unit arrived at the front on January 18th and began operations immediately. They lasted 4 days. By January 22nd, 19 of his 40 men were dead, all killed by Finnish snipers they never located, all shot at ranges exceeding 300 meters, all eliminated with single shots. The survivors reported that they had never even seen their enemies. They would take position, scan the forest for hours, see nothing, and then watch their partner's head explode from a bullet that came from a direction they had not been watching. One Soviet soldier, Private Alexei Kuznetsov, survived an encounter with Haya by pure chance. He had been crossing an open area when the man next to him fell dead. Kuznetsov dove into the snow and did not move for 7 hours, lying face down in temperatures that reached minus 38 degrees Celsius that day. He survived frostbite on 3 fingers and both feet. He told his officers the same thing every other survivor reported. "I never saw him. He is a ghost. He cannot be killed." The Soviet military had fought and defeated enemies across Eastern Europe for decades. They had overwhelmed Polish defenses. They had crushed resistance movements. They had executed strategic operations that Western military analysts considered brilliant. But they had no doctrine for fighting an enemy like the Finnish snipers. By February 1940, Soviet soldiers in certain sectors simply refused to follow orders that required movement during daylight hours. Officers reported mass insubordination. Men would rather face court-martial than exposure to Finnish marksmen. One battalion commander shot 3 of his own soldiers for refusing to advance. The rest of the battalion still would not move. They had done the mathematics of survival. And those mathematics said that a firing squad offered better odds than a Finnish sniper. The psychological impact spread beyond the immediate combat zones. Soviet divisions moving toward Finland began experiencing desertion rates that had never been recorded in Red Army history. Men would disappear during night marches. They would hide in supply depots. They would fake injuries to avoid deployment. Soviet political officers, who normally maintained discipline through fear, found that their soldiers feared something more than execution. They feared the white ghosts. Lieutenant Volkov, who had lost 17 men in December, lost 31 more in January. By February, his battalion was combat ineffective not because they lacked ammunition or food, but because they would not leave their trenches. He sent a report to his superiors recommending withdrawal from the sector. The report was rejected. He was ordered to advance regardless of casualties. On February 9th, Volkov led his men forward in a desperate assault. He was killed by a bullet through the throat at 11:23 a.m. The bullet came from 387 meters away. The shooter was never identified. The Soviet High Command did something in February 1940 that it had never done in any previous war. They placed individual bounties on specific enemy soldiers. The bounty for Simo Häyhä was set at 1,000 rubles, equivalent to 2 years' salary for an average Soviet worker. The bounty for any confirmed Finnish sniper kill was set at 500 rubles. These were not psychological warfare numbers. These were genuine financial incentives backed by Stalin's personal authorization. The problem was that claiming the bounty required identifying and killing a target that Soviet forces could not locate. Haya moved between positions constantly, never using the same snow burrow twice. He operated alone or with a single spotter who was also an expert marksman. He would fire 3 to 5 shots, then disappear into the forest before Soviet forces could organize a response. His movements left no tracks that could be followed because he moved through areas where the snow was too deep for pursuers. The Soviets tried everything. They deployed artillery to saturate entire forest sections where snipers were suspected to be hiding. They sent fighter aircraft to strafe snow-covered terrain with machine gun fire. They organized night raids with full companies trying to surprise Finnish positions. None of these tactics worked because they were designed to fight conventional enemies who stayed in fixed positions. Finnish snipers were not conventional. They were nomadic hunters who understood that mobility was survival. On March 6, 1940, the Soviets achieved their only major success against Haya. An explosive round from a Soviet rifle struck him in the jaw during a firefight, causing massive damage to his face. He was evacuated and survived, but his combat operations ended. Soviet forces celebrated this as a decisive victory. What they did not know was that Haya had already killed 542 Soviet soldiers with his rifle, plus at least 200 more with his submachine gun in close-range engagements. His injury did not change the outcome of the war. It simply removed one man from a system that had dozens more like him. The Winter War ended on March 13, 1940, with a peace treaty that forced Finland to cede territory but preserved Finnish independence. The Soviet Union had deployed 750,000 soldiers, 6,000 tanks, and 3,800 aircraft against a Finnish force that never exceeded 340,000 men and had virtually no armor or air support. Soviet casualties totaled 321,000 dead, wounded, or missing. Finnish casualties totaled 70,000. The 32 documented Finnish snipers credited with over 300 kills each had eliminated more than 10,000 Soviet soldiers combined. This represented roughly 3% of all Soviet combat deaths caused by less than 0.01% of the Finnish fighting force. The kill ratio achieved by these marksmen, approximately 320 to 1, has never been matched in any subsequent conflict. But the real impact was not measured in body counts. It was measured in the Soviet military reforms that followed. The Red Army completely restructured its sniper training program based on lessons learned in Finland. They created specialized sniper schools. They developed new tactics for counter-sniper operations. They wrote doctrine manuals that devoted entire chapters to fighting against concealed marksmen in winter conditions. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, the Red Army deployed the most sophisticated sniper program in the world. Soviet snipers like Vasily Zaitsev and Ludmila Pavlichenko would achieve fame for kill counts that sometimes exceeded 300 enemies. These Soviet heroes were trained using methods developed specifically to counter what the Finns had done during the Winter War. The hunters had become the hunters again. Simo Haiha survived his injuries and lived until 2002, dying at age 96. He never spoke publicly about his wartime service until the 1990s. When asked how he felt about killing so many men, he gave a response that captured the mindset of every Finnish soldier who fought in the Winter War. "I did what I was told to do as well as I could."